Hello and welcome to a Photoshop tutorial of the basics of editing in Photoshop. Today I'm going to be covering how to open up a photo in Camera Raw and then importing it into Photoshop for the most basic of edits to just kind of make your image pop a little bit. This isn't going to be extensive or huge, so just be aware that it is the basics if you are just a beginner. So the first step is to find the photo that you want. Today I'm going to be editing this photo right here. Now my rule of thumb is when I go to edit anything, I do not edit the original. So what I like to do is make a copy of it. So I right click and I can copy, and then I right click in here and I paste. So now that I have a copy of it, and I'm going to edit just the copy so that my original always stays as is. So the next step, for me at least, is to open it up in Camera Raw. But to do that, I go to Bridge. So you open up your Adobe Creative Cloud, find Bridge, and open. This is kind of a file organization system, which then you go in to all of your stuff, and then you go down and find your file. Now this is kind of similar to Lightroom, so if you're using Lightroom, some of these things will be very similar. So here's my copy. I found it. And since it's a raw file, you can just double click it and open it, or if you're JPEG, you can right click, open in Camera Raw, and it will bring it up just like this. This is going to be your Camera Raw editor, which again is going to be extremely similar to Lightroom. So if you have Lightroom, then you will can also probably follow along. Now you can at this point mess with the temperature and tint, but I normally don't do that. Especially if you're a beginner, you will get some funky colors. But I'm going to go over just some of the basics here. This right here is going to be where you are at. Exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance, and saturation. As a beginner, there's a lot of other things you can get into that I don't recommend right away. So we're just going to start and just stick with this just to kind of get you started and make those photos pop just a little bit. This first slider here is your exposure. If you look at your histogram here, this is going to tell you where you want to be at, and you want to be in between these two without either of these two kind of triangle things lighting up. So we're going to try to stay under that. You want this to be, I guess, as even as possible throughout the whole thing. So we're going to try to mess with that. So this is your exposure. So if you have a raw file, you're going to be able to really mess with this. Your exposure, like your exposure triangle that you learned in some of your earlier lessons, allow you to expose it properly. Okay, so you're going to be, this is super blown out if you accidentally mess up your exposure before, or you get it really dark. So you kind of notice those in your camera. So you can kind of make this go back and forth till it has kind of an even look that you want. Okay. Then I usually go into my whites and blacks. I don't mess with the highlights and shadows just yet. And I kind of push these a little bit until you start to see that clipping. This is what is called clipping right here, which is it makes your whites so white that there's zero detail in that. So I like to kind of push that up until I see it clip, and then I pull it back a little bit. Also with your blacks, you can do the same thing. Okay, and I push those until they start to do that. Now when I go up to mess with the highlights, any of these highlights that I don't want blown out, if they're not bright enough, you can make them go up, and you can see all of my highlights in this area have no detail whatsoever. Or you can bring them back to bring in that detail. So if you see that, so we may bring that down a little bit. Right, shadows. These are these areas, which if you see the shadows here, so any area there was shadow, you can bring up to bring all that detail in, or you can bring down to kind of get rid of that detail, make it darker. Some people like that contrasty look, others don't, depending on what you're shooting, but I usually bring that down just a little bit. Okay, and I kind of have it where I want it right here. So now I can go in to take a look at my clarity. I haven't hit contrast yet. Clarity, what that does is it kind of makes your photos really pop. If you take a look at that from what it was to that. This is kind of one of my favorite tools here. It just makes everything look so crisp. So, but if you do it too much, you kind of get a very crazy HDR look, which we do not want. Everyone will look at that and go, that's photoshopped. So I raise that up just a little bit till I can tell a difference, and then I stop. And then I also take a look at my contrast, and I just put that out just a little bit more. And if you look at this, some of my stuff is clipping right there. So I can either bring back the shadows, which I won't do, or bring back the blacks until that is in there without any of those clipping. So, so here's my before over here, and here's my after edited. So it just, as you can see, it kind of just has that pop to it. Okay, so I can also go in now. Let's get rid of that. Nope. There we go. No, come on. There we go. Now I can go into my vibrant setting, and your vibrance is kind of that color look. So if you bring it all the way up here, you bring in all that color, and you bring it down here, vibrance goes away. As you can see, there's still some of that color in there though. So I like to bring this up just a little bit to bring in those colors. And you can also mess with the saturation. Saturation, and it does a similar thing. You can bring this down to where it looks like a black and white photo. Okay, and I like to bring this up just a tiny bit. As you can see again, here's your before, and here is your after. Alright, let's go back to here. Now, we can't save it like this, so we need to open this into Photoshop. So what I like to do is if you hold Shift, if you look down here, Open Image, I don't like to open it as just an image. In case I want to come back, I can always come back and edit in here. So if you hold Shift, you'll notice that says Open Object. What it does is allow you to open it as a smart object, which you definitely want. And then you can always come back into Camera Raw and continue editing and messing with these, and then go back into Photoshop and just go back and forth to tweak as much as you want. That is something that I did not see that you could do in Lightroom. Once you're here, you take it into Lightroom, and at that point you can't mess with it anymore after that. So we're going to hit this, Shift, click on Open Object. It will bring it into Photoshop. Just wait for Photoshop to show up here. Come on. Where are you? There you are. So now it's going to open up into Photoshop here. Now what we're going to be doing is working with layers. This is your base layer. If you want to hide something, you just press this eyeball, allows you to hide it. And we're going to be working layers, so we don't want to actually touch this layer. We don't want to mess with it. So it's going to bring up new layers. And all of these bring up those new layers. Now there's a lot of these things that we can do, which brightness and contrast, which we messed with earlier, exposure over here, vibrance, hue, saturation, all of these different things are things that we could have messed with over in the other one, but it's just a lot easier to mess with that raw file in there. So the next thing that I like to do when I come in here, because I've already made those edits, is I like to mess with the levels, and this messes with your histogram, and this is where I get that final little touch. So what I like to do here is bring this in, and it kind of brings those darks in to kind of just give it a little bit more crisper look. And then I take this one and I bring it over, and it kind of brings in those highlights as well. It's that final touch where I'm hitting each of these corners of where it's starting to go, and you can tell, you can look at it to where it looks a little flat here, and it just kind of adds that that crispness and kind of gets rid of that flat look. So this is just a very, very beginner way of making your photos pop. So then you go up to here, File, and you can save your Photoshop image. And if you go in here, you can just save it. This is one of my old projects that I did. Or what I like to do is save as, once you've saved it as a Photoshop. And now you come down to here and click JPEG, okay? And then when you go to save it, I leave this at baseline standard, and this is the quality of it. I leave it at, well, it starts off at 10, and what I do is I put it all the way to 12 to make it the maximum quality that can be. I hit OK, and it will save your image, and now you have a JPEG of your new image. And it looks a lot crisper and a lot cleaner. Let's take a look at this over here. And here is the raw file. This is what it originally looked like. And here is the new edited version of it. There's the old one and the new one. Notice just how much of a difference just those few edits make. Once you start really getting into editing, you can do a whole lot more to it and really tweak all those colors. But for now, we're just going to start with the absolute basics of making your images pop. All right, thank you for watching.